Hey guys, Scott here. Now, Perth has been one of the wildest property stories in the country. And what's funny, every single time Perth runs hard, YouTube, social media, property gurus, even big accounts pop out of nowhere and say, that's it, it's done now. Perth has lost steam, it has to crash next year. I saw that at the start of 2025, so many people came out and they said that Perth's gonna crash. People said Perth had already run too far in 2024, so 2025, it would flatten out or, even crash. And then 2025 finished, and we all saw the result. Perth was one of the fastest growing markets in the country. So most of these calls are dead wrong because they're not based on data, they're based on vibes. Now I'm seeing the same thing again for 2026. I've seen so many videos saying Perth is a lie, Perth has no fuel left, sell everything, get out now. But here's what's different this time. There are two major developments happening in Perth right now, and most people are not connecting them together. One is happening right in front of your face. The other has flown right under the radar. No one's talking about it. So stay with me because I'm going to walk you through both in plain English, and I'm going to tell you what they are likely to do to Perth next because you are not ready for this. And quick one before we jump in, I do these videos every single day on property and the economy, so hit subscribe and tap the bell so you don't miss my next update. Let's start with the reality on the ground because this is not just tight, it's catastrophically unhealthy. Now, the source for this is the Real Estate Institute of Western Australia, that's REIWA. They track what's happening in Perth week to week, suburb to suburb, and they've just put out fresh numbers that should make every buyer and seller pay attention. At the end of December, Perth had just 1,564 homes listed for sale. That's not low, that's Perth basically running on fumes. And the trend is worse than the headline. That number was 35.5% lower than November and 57.2% lower than December last year. Now, normally in December, listings do drop. People switch off, they travel, they don't want inspections during the holidays. But what REIWA is saying is this drop is being made worse by something that's been building for months. New listings have been below long-term averages for a long time now. Winter listings were about 11.5% below the 10-year average, and spring was about 15% below. So supply is thin even before the holiday slowdown hits. And here's where Perth gets weird. Even though it's a strong seller's market, a lot of sellers are still not selling. Not because they don't want to, it's because they're scared. People want to downsize, some people have made great money and want to sell and buy again. Some people want to upgrade, some want to shift schools, some want to relocate. But they look around and they kind of go, hey, if I sell, where do I go? Because the market is moving so fast and there are so few options that selling first feels risky. And it's not just buying that scares them. Renting short term is also brutal in Perth right now, especially if you need to stay close to work or schools. This leads to people in Perth sitting on their properties and not listing them and tightening supply. Now, when supply gets tighter, competition gets nastier for the few properties that are listed. And when competition gets nastier, prices keep pushing higher, even if people are exhausted. This is what I call the logjam, and it feeds itself, it gets worse over time. Now let's talk about what this looks like in numbers, because this is where it really hits. Perth's median house price hit a new record of $850,000 in December. That's up 1.2% in just 1 month, and up 12% over the year. Units are running harder again. The median unit price hit $590,000, up a whopping 1.7% in 1 month, and up 18% over the year. This is exactly what happens when houses get too expensive. Buyers don't disappear, they slide sideways into the next most affordable option, and that's the unit market. And it's something that we've been warning about, and we've been telling people to keep an eye on key unit opportunities. Now let's look at the speed. Houses and units were selling in a median of just 8 days. That is not a calm market, that's a market where people are making decisions under a huge amount of pressure. You see a property you want to buy, 9 days later it's gone. Now let's take a look at rents. Perth's median dwelling rent is $700 a week in December. That's crazy. And even though it didn't spike that month, it was still 7.7% higher than a year ago. So renters are still dealing with high weekly costs. When vacancies are tight, the power stays with landlords, not tenants. So that's the first big development. This is a supply crunch that's turning into a seller logjam, and it's keeping the whole market tight. So let's talk about the second development. because this one is flying under the radar and it is massive for Perth. AUKUS. This project was announced back in 2021 and it's the defence partnership between Australia, the United States and the UK, and it is focused on nuclear-powered submarines and the long-term capability in our region. And for Perth, this is huge because AUKUS isn't just a headline about submarines, it is about people, jobs, its families, and its housing demand. In fact, over the coming years, this project is set to dramatically lift demand in Perth, especially in one very specific part of the city, and that detail does matter a lot, because this demand isn't spread evenly across WA. It's landing in Perth's southwest corridor, centered around Rockingham and the area surrounding HMAS Stirling. Now, HMAS Stirling is a Royal Australian Navy base located just south of Perth. It's already the largest naval base in Australia, and it's about to become even more important. Here's what we know. There's an $8 billion upgrade currently underway at the Navy base to support AUKUS. From 2027, up to 4 US Virginia-class submarines and 1 UK Astute-class submarine will rotate through Perth for maintenance and operational support. And this is the key point. This is not a short visit. This is not a fly-in, fly-out. This is a permanent, long-term presence. Roughly 1,200 to 1,400 US and UK personnel, many of them are going to come with families, will be posted into Perth on rotations that last 2 to 3 years at a time. So this isn't a one-off spike in demand. It's a slow burn structural increase in demand that builds year after year. And because it's concentrated around the Navy base and nearby suburbs, the impact on housing will feel much bigger on the ground than it looks on a national chart. That's why this matters. Perth already has a supply problem. Now it has a new long-term demand driver being laid on top of it. And most people are still treating AUKUS like a defense headline, not a housing story. But for Perth, it is very much a housing story. So now put these two developments together. On one side, you've got Perth stuck in a supply crunch and a seller logjam, which keeps listings low and competition high. On the other side of that, you've got AUKUS gradually adding a new workforce into a corridor that already doesn't have enough housing. So when people say Perth has to crash, you've got to ask them one simple question. Where is all the supply coming from to cause this crash? Because a market doesn't cool properly until supply hits the market and fixes the supply-demand dynamic. And right now, Perth supply isn't loosening, it is tightening. Now, does that mean every suburb grows the same? Absolutely not. Does that mean you can buy anything and just win in Perth? No. But if you're waiting for a Perth crash just because you saw, a video about New Zealand or Canada and what's happening in those markets, you might actually be waiting a very long time because Perth right now is being squeezed from both sides. This is the squeeze story. So that's the Perth setup headed into 2026, a seller logjam that's choking supply, and a new long-term demand driver that most people are not pricing in properly. Drop a comment and tell me what you think happens next. Do you think Perth finally loosens up with more listings, or do you think the squeeze continues, especially around the Southwest Corridor? And if you found this useful, make sure you subscribe and hit the bell because I cover property and the economy every day, and I keep breaking down what the data is actually doing, not what the internet feels like. See you at the next video.